Hello, my name's Ted Wiard. I'm the founder of Golden Willow Retreat Center, which is an emotional sanctuary focused on grief and loss. I started this work due to my own losses that happened over a very short time. Where first my brother died in a shipwreck up in Alaska, and then my wife died of cancer. After 2 years of working with that cancer, I learned about loss and realized there wasn't a lot of hope. Soon after her death, only a couple years later, my 2 daughters, Carrie and Amy, died in a car crash along with their mother-in-law. And I found myself so stripped, so destroyed, and with nowhere really to go. I ended up wandering around the country, just lost, grasping for anything. As I slowly came back to my senses and realized I was still part of this world, I realized there should be a place to help people. And so my present wife, Marcella, and I chose to start a center where people could come and have that sanctuary, that cocoon, to allow healing to happen, to allow that natural, normal healing process called grief. Loss comes in many types of forms. Loss can be the loss due to death. It can also be the loss of a dream, a pet, financial, home, even just self or addiction and the loss within that, the loss of a faith of a spiritual higher power. Loss can also just be the end of a day and the sunset, and we don't get that day back. In the midst of loss, whatever that loss is, the foundation of our reality and the illusion of our safety is shaken, rocked, destroyed, decimated. Any of those, we die as well. Within a loss, actually who we thought we were dies, that definition. Within that, we start the grief process to redefine ourselves, rebirth ourselves. And what happens is we have one type of life and it's dead. And within that, then we start working the steps of moving into our new life. The bummer is that most of our life is still moving on, and so we don't have this time that used to be given to so many people. The world's still moving quickly, the bills need to be paid, and we run into these secondary losses. And secondary losses are that place of maybe I don't have the money I used to have, or I don't have the partner I can talk to, or in the midst of that divorce, I lost some friends. Whatever that is, those come into play as well. With whatever one's loss is, there's this natural process. And our world has kind of forgotten that, especially in our fast-paced world. And that natural process is a way to actually heal and start to move into my new world. And so within that new world, I can even yearn for it. I can even see it, but I feel like I've failed. And it's because we've kind of lost the teachings around the grief process. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross really put a lot of work into this, and she came up with the 5 stages of grief, which has become kind of a generic type statement. Everyone goes, oh yeah, those 5 stages of grief. There's a lot of depth in that, and her work continues. Before she died, one of her regrets was that she called them stages, because we all found slowly that they're phases, and we move in and out and back and forth. And so she came up with these 5, and I've added a few more, and so today I get the opportunity to just really talk about, in my own vocabulary, how that natural, normal healing process happens. So we talk about denial, and denial is that piece of, I can't believe this has happened, or this other part of, I'm just not ready for it. And I see denial as insulation. It's kind of this ebb and flow of me moving closer to my loss, and it's my psyche actually catching up with my brain. So I might even have a fact. I might even have the acceptance of acknowledgement of that fact, and yet my psyche's not ready for it. My infrastructure's not there. So I kind of flirt with it. I move in and I move out and I move back and forth. A difficult piece of denial is as I move back, I start to look for other things to hide that loss, and so I often fall into medicators of different addictive tendencies, from alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, internet, shopping, gambling, or all the plethora of different places. Anything I can grasp that might give me quick relief and also allow me to deny, to really deny this loss that's on my lifeline. So within this ebb and flow and with this addictive tendencies, I have to be very conscious. Now, I am one person who definitely believes in recess. And we can't just stare and be engulfed in our loss. So we do need to be able to ebb and flow and find distractors that are healthy. Maybe I do jog 2 miles but not 24. Maybe I do go to a dance and enjoy the evening but not have to move into anything else. And so I find ways that I can get oxygen and take a breath and still realize that loss is there. Somewhere in that denial process, I move into anger. And please remember, once again, this is not a linear process. They're all mixed up, kind of like a soup or a stew, or I like to think of an omelet. And so within this omelet, I can be nibbling on any of these. But somewhere in this process, and we move into anger. And quite often, anger is thought of as a negative word. And we were trained to think of anger as a bad word. We got in trouble when we didn't get the bubble gum as a child. And we got in trouble when we didn't think it was fair we had to come in for recess. And so wherever we had anger, quite often, we got in trouble. Anger is only an emotion. It's no different than any other emotion. What I do with my anger, now that's where I move into behavior that can either be behooving or can be hindrance to my life. So anger, I see, is really just that protest. I protest this is my story. I protest this is happening to me. This is a drag. And so it's really that protest of, I didn't want this on my lifeline. Within anger, I actually have the opportunity of finding myself. Anger is actually a very present moment, so I'm flirting and actually starting to practice being present. Because when I'm stuck in the past, I'm overwhelmed by the future, the two collide, and I move into a free fall. And this is what happens in grief. Well, in this anger, I actually start to build that foundation for maybe the first time in maybe a long, long time. And so within that anger, my adrenals get kicked up and I come to life. I kind of see it like jump starting a car, that the battery is dead and I get that energy. And in that, all of a sudden, I have a chance to really be at a place of, oh, I'm still alive. I'm still here. My body is still here. Now, in my own wild thinking, I kind of see it as when we have a loss, our soul is yanked out of our body. And as this body comes back to life and realizes, yeah, it still needs to go to the bathroom and it still needs to eat and hopefully can try to get out of bed and all these pieces, the soul kind of goes, oh, there you are. And kind of like a lighthouse with this energy starts to move back in. And in that, once again, we don't get to be who we used to be, but we all of a sudden have that chance to have it come back together. Within this anger and this bringing the body back to life again with the adrenals, we can pop back into denial, and I can get angry at someone and move into a place of fighting and that sort of thing, and that can be denial. And also I move into bargaining. And bargaining is the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. I should have done this, I could have done that, if they had only done that, what if they had done that, what if they had done this, who if they had done that, and what, blah, 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 blah. And I call it the monkey chatter. It also happens to be the garden of guilt and shame. And when I can't blame anyone else, it has a tendency that I start to blame myself. Within this bargaining, it's a very important piece, even when it doesn't make sense. Even when these emotions aren't making sense, and we move into that place, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to grasp any way I can have control and make sense out of something and actually have it be how it used to be. So if I'm the director of a movie, I have the wonderful opportunity to have the film go along and I don't like a place and I say, cut, let's add this. And then I do the film again. If it's my lifeline, I go, cut, what about this? Cut, what about this? Because I keep hitting that loss. Here I'm chiseling away at denial. As that is happening, what I'm really doing is starting to move into more and more that this is really happening on me right now. And in that piece, we start to move into depression. Depression is the exhaustion, the sheer exhaustion of denial, anger, and bargaining. We've been taught so well depression's a bad word. It's really not. This depression happens to be situational depression. It may lead to clinical depression, but it's that place of being sad. I'm just sad. I surrender. So I see depression as surrender. I'm actually moving into that place where I drop. And within that drop is where there's so much healing, and we're so afraid to go into that well. And yet, as many poems say, and that's where the coins are, is in that well. And as I drop, it's kind of like an elevator, and I actually move into acceptance. Now remember, I said this whole process is like a big old omelet. The first time I heard the word acceptance, I popped right into anger. How dare you say I have to accept that my wife died? How dare you say that my wife died? How dare you say that my brother had to die in a shipwreck, or my daughters had to die, or these other things that I feel are losses in my life? I had no idea that acceptance really just meant the acknowledgement of a fact. It does not mean everything's chill, everything's cool, and I have to have the world be wonderful and awesome. I have the acknowledgement of a fact that I have a loss in my world. So now me as an optimist like to see this as a natural normal healing process where I accept I have a loss and I am now healing. So in this acceptance, I have moved to acknowledge, and I claim I have this piece called I have a loss. Now in Kubler-Ross's work, this was the end of the 5 stages, partially because she worked a lot with the dying. And when you move to that acceptance place, then you're starting to transform and transition into that new piece of your world, or whatever that means to someone. I wasn't quite happy with this in my passion of emotional healing from a loss, and so I came up with one called the unknown. And I see the unknown as where forgiveness lives, and grace, and real true healing, and spiritual connection, and self-realization. I can't force any of these, I don't believe. These happen as I consciously heal from my loss. In other words, as I consciously grieve. They magically happen, and that's why I put them in the unknown. So I can't talk about them a whole lot, because it is the unknown. I have great forgiveness for my mother-in-law who ran a stop sign, and in that she died and my children died. That doesn't have to make sense to someone's brain. I miss her, I grieve her, she was a good woman, and it was a horrendous mistake. Yet within this grief process of healing, all of a sudden that gets to come in. And due to my losses within that, I feel happier today. I do feel more self-realized, and I celebrate life to the utmost level. And it can still be a bummer, and it is, the pieces of my story. And yes, I'd do anything to be able to hold my daughters one more time. In that unknown, I added one more called relocation. And relocation is actually, for me, a big part of Golden Willow Retreat. It's actually taking the fuel from the anger, transforming that, moving through those phases, and then moving into relocation. So moving from the concrete, the place that has confined and defined me to such a level, has put me in a lead balloon, and I'm in the middle of it. And I've stepped out of that balloon. And now from my experiences, I can now be of service. So moving from the concrete to the metaphysical, or from the abstract, and moving into that place where I can still be in relations, and my people that I've lost and the losses within my life can be the scars of wisdom rather than me being yanked back into the open, gaping wound. So within that, we move into transformation, and in that I get to be reborn. And with that, I can hopefully be a light holder for someone else that's in the midst of that dark and deep well. So maybe they too can choose to heal from grief and loss.